All right, let's go ahead and move on to the very latest from Bibi Netanyahu. He was on one of our Sunday shows over the weekend, Margaret Brennan pressing him pretty aggressively on whether he is losing support for the United States. Let's take a listen to how he responded.
The IDF has only destroyed 30% of Hamas leadership, and that the amount of tunnels that Hamas uses have really only been tiny in terms of what has been destroyed by the IDF. There is growing distrust of you personally, sir. You know this, in the U.S. Congress and within the Biden White House. When your closest ally is telling you things like this and telling you that you need to reconsider a strategy, isn't it worth considering?
Look, I think that the U.S. agrees with us on the goal of destroying Hamas.
Yes.
And on the goal of releasing the hostages. The decisions of how to do that are left with us and with me and the elected cabinet of Israel. And we're doing that. A lot of things that we were told by the best of friends initially turned out not to be true. They said you can't enter the ground war without having enormous complications. They said you cannot fight, you can't enter Gaza City, you can't go into the tunnels. It'll be a terrible bloodbath. All of that turned out to be not true.
Sure, but the former head of Central Command was on this program just a few weeks ago and said basically you have not articulated any specific end game here. So, but putting that aside, I want to come back to a few different things you said.
Wait a minute, Margaret, hold on. You lob these grenades at me and you keep on moving. Well, first of all, you say there's no confidence in me. Well, the Israeli public has confidence in me. Last week,
there were massive protests throughout Israel yesterday.
Of course we have protests. We have protests. Israel is a democracy. We've had protests.
What Hamas has done is horrific, but President Biden has said your actions, sir, are over the top. Aren't you concerned that Israel is creating more terrorists than it is killing?
What would America do? Yeah. What would America do, Margaret, if you faced the equivalent of 29/11s, 50,000 Americans slaughtered in one day, 10,000 Americans, including mothers and children, held hostage? Would you not be doing what Israel is doing? You'd be doing a hell of a lot more. And all Americans that I talk to, nearly all say that.
Well, I'm sure the Americans he talks to does say that. That's certainly something. I'm just this man is living in a delusion, like in a pyramid of his own construction. He's like, the Israeli public supports me. How in a straight face can you possibly say that? You know the other part of this thing, Krystal? He continues to do only interviews with US-based media outlets. He won't face his own people in Hebrew to face any critical challenge. Go and sit with your own media outlets who will actually ask you very detailed questions. They're not nearly as afraid as our people are. I mean, look at that. It's the most tepid, like, hey, you know, some people say President Biden, Haaretz and many other Israeli journalists and others that we have covered here are far more critical of the Netanyahu government than most of the people in our own country. So that was my big takeaway.
I thought she did a decent job of pressing him. But, you know, the Biden administration gives him every out because, first of all, their criticism of him is so tepid. Oh, Biden said it was over the top. Oh, my gosh. Wow, that's unbelievable. It's so tepid. It's so lame. It doesn't come with any sort of pressure. And you have multiple U.S. spokespeople who have now repeated basically what Bibi says there of like, hey, it's their country. They can do what they want. Okay, but we don't have to ship them the weapons of their genocide and of their atrocities, okay? We don't have to ship them the funding. We don't have to provide them diplomatic cover both at the UN and at the ICJ like we have done over and over and over again. We don't have to block and veto multiple ceasefire resolutions as we have done now. So it just is so, it's the peak of gaslighting to pretend like, oh, well, it's just up to them and we've got nothing to do with it. Bullshit. You don't want to use the leverage that you have. And so Bibi feels perfectly comfortable to go on American television and say, oh, the Americans, yeah, they've pressed us on some things. But ultimately, actually, they've been wrong about all of the criticisms that they've lobbied at us or all of the suggestions that they made about how we should conduct this offensive. I mean, he said, oh, they told us it would be a terrible bloodbath if we won. It has been a terrible bloodbath. It has been a terrible bloodbath. No one was wrong about that. Now, did the U.S. actually, fully express those concerns that we've been willing to do anything about that? No, absolutely not. But, it's just another humiliation for the Biden administration to have Bibi on our television, basically like throwing in their face any sort of concerns or objections they have. And Bibi getting a little bit testy there with Margaret Brennan because, as you said, Saagar, he's not used to being challenged or subjecting himself to anything approaching a critical interview. We're going to get to the protests in Tel Aviv in just a minute because, as you said, he's not delusional. He knows. He's just a shameless liar. He knows how precarious his domestic political situation is. That has driven a lot of his war-making, decision-making, is how precarious his political standing is. I mean, you have an overwhelming majority of Israelis for a variety of reasons, most of which don't match my disgust with Bibi Netanyahu, but for a variety of reasons, want early elections and want him gone. So insane and delusional and just a flat-out lie to claim otherwise. But let me just also update you on, we've been telling you there have been ongoing negotiations about a potential new temporary ceasefire. This was the reason the U.S. gave for the most recent blocking of a resolution in favor of a permanent immediate ceasefire. We said, we can't do that because we need to negotiate this other temporary potential ceasefire. Here's the framework as best we know it that is being worked on. I don't know how close they are to actually securing this deal, but reportedly the updated U.S. framework includes the release of several hundred Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the release of 35 to 40 Israeli hostages, including civilian women, female soldiers, men over 50, and hostages in serious medical condition. The number of Palestinian prisoners released for each of the female soldiers will be higher than for the other abductees that will be released at this stage. For each hostage who is released, Israel will agree to a day of ceasefire when in total, in the first phase of the deal, it will be possible to reach 6 weeks of ceasefire. The number I saw floated was potentially like 60 days. The U.S. framework includes an initial and limited return of Palestinian citizens to the north of the Gaza Strip that will start during the implementation of this stage of the deal under conditions that will be defined during the detailed negotiations. Of course, there's next to nothing to go back to in the north of the Gaza Strip, which has been utterly destroyed. The U.S. framework also includes a significant increase in the scope of humanitarian aid that enters the Gaza Strip. Well, previous frameworks have called for that as well, to no avail. We'll get more on that in a moment. And the next phases in the deal that focus on release of soldiers and exchange of bodies were left very general, as in the previous framework. So no clue if they are actually close to securing this deal, although there seems to be serious efforts to engage with this framework, although Bibi also making clear that even if they do agree to something approaching this framework and this temporary ceasefire, he still fully 100% intends to continue the war after that, including going into Rafah, something that the Biden administration has also expressed concerns over. And our own spokespeople and national security advisors like Jake Sullivan have said that they have not received any plan for keeping civilians in Rafah safe. 1.3 million Palestinians have been pushed into Rafah. Also, with regards to, provision of aid, that is where the overwhelming majority of humanitarian aid flows through. You already have people dying of starvation in incredibly desperate circumstances. So that's where we are in terms of this potential hostage deal and Bibi's intention to continue the war that has already incurred such an unbelievable cost on Palestinian civilians after that deal's conclusion.
Yeah, so the hostage deal, I think the major headline out of it really was not only in terms of the upcoming Rafah operation, which could be delayed, but it was the unwillingness, at least on the part of the Israeli side, not yet clear really on the Palestinian side, that they're like, this has to be a time-limited hostage deal that doesn't leave it open-ended. That said, the framework, as what we have for 6 weeks or something like that, we did see a resumption of hostilities after the last one. It is certainly possible there could be some sort of diplomatic opening, though, however, in the interim that would either delay or significantly change, because you can just imagine, Krystal, if you have 6 weeks of no headlines and a change in the diplomatic situation, of a release of the hostage, continuing deteriorating domestic political conditions for Bibi inside of Israel, and if they double down on their military operation, it could change. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't think it's not likely. I think it's probably the most likely course. But if there is some sort of framework in general, when the guns stop firing and there's some sort of release, that's, you know, net positive for everybody who's involved.
Yeah, the only time that there's been significant hostage exchange was in the previous short ceasefire. I mean, the people of Gaza, the Palestinians are suffering so much. So you have to cheer for even a temporary ceasefire. But Bibi at least is making it pretty clear right now that he fully intends to go into Rafah. And, you know, this also does get to his domestic political standing because they haven't come anywhere close to eradicating Hamas. They haven't even, you know, been able to take out the top leaders that have been on their target list. So he has every incentive to hold on to power by continuing this assault on the Gaza Strip and going into Rafah. So I fully expect that will be the case, you know, as evidence of just what shaky political ground he is in. Tel Aviv experiencing some really wild protests and met with a violent police reaction. We can put this on the screen. You can see the size of the protests here, the number of people on the streets in Tel Aviv. These are protests directly against Netanyahu, people who have, you know, a variety of criticisms of him, also concerns about the failure to secure release of the hostages. You can see some of the police response here, which, again, very violent, very aggressive. Here you see a water cannon being shot at people. There are some incidents from the police here that are already being investigated. So that's a reaction to the protests that are going against Bibi. Now let's take a look at the protests that have been going on now for some time that have been actually very successful at starving the Palestinian people by further blocking aid from going into the Gaza Strip. Put this up on the screen. Oh, look at these folks milling around, blowing up a bouncy castle and, you know, celebrating, dancing, waving the flag. I don't see that same aggressive response here. And you can see on the screen all of the aid trucks that are backed up at this crossing, unable to pass because of these protesters' desire to starve Palestinians more than they're already starving. And make no mistake, they are already starving to death. Of course, it will be the youngest, the weakest, the infirm who succumb to starvation first. And again, very difficult video to watch, but let's put this up on the screen. This is a 2-month-old baby. So this baby was born after October 7th. And here he is, his name is Mahmoud Fatou, breathing some of his last breaths before dying because of starvation. That is the direct result of the U.S. administration's policy of unconditional support. That is a direct result of Bibi Netanyahu and his government. That is a direct result of those protesters blocking aid from getting into the Gaza Strip and imposing collective punishment on the entire population, including this baby that never saw a day that wasn't comprised of this horrifying assault on the people of Gaza.
Yeah, it's terrifying. The hospital said that he died of acute malnutrition. The reason that really what comes through in terms of the Israeli government is that they loved, and you would even notice in the interview, he's like, of course we have protests, we're a democracy. I'm like, yeah, dude, but you're spraying those people in, it's called Democracy Square, actually, in Tel Aviv, of these protesters. But then the people who are blocking food trucks, you're building, you know, you let them have bouncy castles. Not only that, they're being visited by cabinet members, including the defense minister of the government. That's disparate treatment of people who are protesting. Remember, the official position of the government is that those people are not supposed to be there and the aid trucks are allowed to let in, according to their framework negotiated with the United States and with the United Nations. And it's like, well, okay, if all protesters are treated the same, I actually have no issue with that. But you're not treating all protesters the same. You're selectively allowing some and then selectively suppressing others with the ruling coalition to keep a lid on how unbelievably unpopular were. And what's even crazier is what Israeli media is reporting. Some of the people here who were sprayed and who were in the Democracy Square were the families of hostages who were being held in Gaza. These people, look, obviously we're all the same and all that, but their voices, I would, given the Israeli public, those are some pretty important people. We don't spray them in the face, but these pro-war, like anti-food people who are just allowed total impunity, and that's basically the policy of their government. They're held hostage by the most fringe elements of their society. They're greenlighting settlements and all this other stuff. And if you protest against it, which, again, let's be clear, not all Israelis support this stuff. I know plenty of them who do not and would cringe and are horrified, specifically by the settlements and all that in the West Bank. What are they going to do if they take the streets? The government's going to throw their asses in jail and spray them in the middle of the square.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
That is exactly right. The Washington Post actually had a very good report on those protests blocking the food trucks, the ones with the bouncy castle and the dancing and whatever. And they reported on how, there were IDF soldiers present, there were police present, and they just let it continue.
Right.
Let it continue. Yeah. Even as those aid trucks are backed up, even as that little baby boy is starving to death. And there are more and more reports every day of people who are dying of starvation at this point, again, as the direct result of all of this. And so, you look at things like that. You look at the settlement policy, the Biden administration, they put sanctions on 4 settlers. Oh, my gosh. It's an attempt to frame it as if it is the actions of a few fringe extremists versus the explicit policy of this government, and not just this government, by the way. I mean, the settlements have expanded under every Israeli government since the 70s, every one. So to pretend like this is some fringe project or it's just coming out of the Netanyahu administration even is really inaccurate. This is the explicit aim of the Israeli government, has been for years and years and years. As long as Joe Biden has been in Washington, this has been the policy of the Israeli government. And to pretend otherwise is incredibly, incredibly dishonest. If the Israelis didn't want those food trucks to be blocked, if they wanted those food trucks to get into those starving Gazans, you can damn well bet they would be there. Well,
yeah. I mean, then that's the other thing is you have a cabinet minister who openly goes to war with his own government and supports these people who are protesting. It's just he's an incredibly weak prime minister. Every act of his is weakness, and it's just to bolster his coalition. And you're basically allowing 8 to 10% really of the population to hold hostage the entire country. This is an intolerable situation. I don't know how people there aren't protesting even more against the government.
Yeah.
For something like, especially if you want to see the hostage release, you should be out there, in major force, which is, supposedly, allegedly, what the vast majority of that population actually does believe whenever it comes to this deal.
Yeah, I mean, the overwhelming bulk of the Israeli population believes very much in this war, thinks it should be incredibly aggressive. I mean, we saw those polls early on saying, the IDF, if anything, isn't going far enough. There was only, I think, 1.8% that said they had gone too far. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't delude ourselves about what it is that the population supports. But there is genuine friction with regard specifically to the efforts to secure hostages. At least one poll showed a majority of Israelis thought that should be the primary goal of the war. And of course, what we've seen is that Israel has killed more hostages than they were able to rescue in the course of this offensive, and that the only time that there was significant hostage release was during the ceasefire. That's where the pressure to secure some sort of a deal comes from. And so we'll see if this temporary ceasefire framework that the U.S. is pushing, rather than, a permanent ceasefire, they've decided they want this temporary ceasefire with Bibi, very likely to go in after the conclusion of that. If that is to come to pass, we'll see if that's able to come together.
There you go. We'll keep you guys updated.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.